Before we step into the surreal and brilliant world of Elsa Schiaparelli, a world where fashion meets poetry, where pink becomes a revolution, and where reality dances with dreams, let's take a moment to understand the force behind the name. This is not just a designer's story. It's the story of a woman who dared. And this is how it began. A significant contribution Elsa Schiaparelli made to the world of fashion was her symbiosis with the Surrealist art movement, which was gaining popularity at the time, led by Salvador Dali. On the eve of World War II, the longing to escape the harsh realities of life was unmistakable. The rise of totalitarian regimes across Europe, including Elsa's native Italy, Germany, and Spain, provided the perfect contrast against which Surrealism stood out, taking shape as a powerful aesthetic and artistic force. The collaboration between Salvador Dali and Elsa Schiaparelli gave the world creations of exceptional value, objects that brought the depths of fine art into the realm of fashion. Based on Dali's sketches, Schiaparelli designed a lady's handbag in the shape of a telephone, the now iconic hat shaped like a woman's black high heel pointing toward the sky, gloves with brightly colored fingernails, a cocktail dress with a lobster painted across the skirt, a plastic necklace crawling with metallic bugs, surreal perfume bottle designs, and so much more. Another remarkable artist and poet of the time, Jean Cocteau, created drawings for Elsa's famous embroideries and appliques used in her couture dresses, pieces she interpreted with masterful fluidity in pliable fabrics. Some of Schiaparelli's innovations that have survived to this day include printed fabrics resembling newspaper text, the use of transparent plastic in fashion items, the creation and promotion of pantsuits for women, and of course, shoulder pads, which first appeared in her collections as early as 1932. A devoted admirer of antiquity, like a true Roman, Elsa often focused on drapery and high waists in her bold, sometimes eccentric creations. She introduced high-waisted silhouettes in 1930, and the lines of her garments resembled the statues of Pompeii from the age of Caesar. Her designs gave even the most timid, plain, or self-conscious women the chance to feel visible, beautiful, and full of spirit. Elsa's creation of her signature fragrance, shocking, rich with the scent of patchouli, was housed in bottles shaped like the voluptuous torso of 1930s Hollywood star Mae West, for whom Elsa had designed magnificent costumes in Hollywood. This perfume, this bottle, and this vision helped turn the house of Schiaparelli into a global legend. Later, the torso-shaped perfume bottle would be copied by Jean-Paul Gaultier for his own fragrance line. Hundreds of clients from all over the world flocked to Paris, to 21 Place Vendôme, the home of the Schiaparelli Salon, newly redecorated by the celebrated French interior designer Jean-Michel Franck. The entrance was just to the right of the Hotel Ritz, where Elsa's contemporary, and her greatest rival, Coco Chanel resided at the time. The rivalry between Chanel and Schiaparelli was the talk of all Paris. Chanel had entered the fashion world earlier and was 7 years older. The sudden rise of this Italian artist, as Chanel once referred to her, struck deep. This wasn't a Cold War, it was a battle of brilliance. Its echoes can still be sensed between the lines of this book, even though Schiaparelli rarely mentions her rival by name. Paris fashion historians preserved one particularly telling anecdote. Chanel once invited Schiap, as all of Paris called Elsa, to her atelier, then seated her in a black velvet gown on a freshly painted white oil-painted chair. These two women stole each other's models, photographers, commercial directors, even designers. A true tug-of-war broke out over the famed Russian top model of the 1930s, who would pose for one brand's campaign and then switch to the others. One could draw similar parallels between the relationships of Salvador Dali, Christian Berard, and Jean Cocteau with both Chanel and Schiap. But in fairness, it must be said, in the 1930s, the advantage clearly belonged to Schiaparelli. She had an uncanny sense of the moment and a deep intuition for style, while Chanel, who could neither sketch nor sew, struggled to evolve with the silhouettes of the new decade. The late 1930s saw a dramatic rise in retrospective, historical fashion, a wave of neo-Victorianism inspired by the success of Hollywood period films and the lavish, nostalgic coronation of England's new monarch, King George VI, in 1936. One of the greatest masterpieces of timeless, multifaceted fashion came in the form of Schiaparelli's 1938 summer collection, themed entirely around the circus. It featured astonishing embroidery in beads and sequins, masterfully crafted by the House of Lesage. By the summer of 1939, Schiap unveiled another captivating series, joyful dresses adorned with bustles reminiscent of the heroines in Zola and Maupassant's novels, and she boldly revived the dramatic gigot sleeves once again. During World War II and the German occupation of Paris, Schiaparelli demonstrated her values with clarity and courage. Rather than remain in occupied France, she chose to emigrate to the United States, entrusting her maison to the care of its Swedish director, Irene Dana. The account of her escape, through Spain and Portugal, reads as one of the most adventurous and riveting chapters in this extraordinary life story. Once in the United States, the tireless Elsa gave lectures on fashion to crowds of thousands in stadiums. She worked actively with the Red Cross and organized care packages for French orphans. What a contrast this was to the luxurious wartime life of her rival, Chanel, who spent the years of occupation ensconced in a suite at the Hotel Ritz, wrapped in the arms of her German lover, Officer Hans Gunther von Dinklage. Different temperaments, different fates, and very different notions of what it meant to serve France. After the war, Elsa returned once more to her fashion house. She launched a new perfume, Le Roi Soleil, in a bottle designed by none other than Salvador Dali, and began mentoring two promising young stylists. In 1945, she hired Pierre Cardin as her assistant. 2 years later, in 1947, a young Hubert de Givenchy joined her atelier, soon followed by his loyal creative partner, Philippe Venet. But time has its own rhythm. Post-war Paris became intoxicated with the arrival of new names, Madame Carvin, Pierre Balmain, and finally, in 1947, the explosion that changed everything, the premiere of Christian Dior's new look. Elsa never truly embraced this style. To her, its extravagant yet refined femininity seemed at odds with the intellectual daring of her own aesthetic. And yet, it captured the public imagination, leaving Schiaparelli's avant-garde models in the shadows. It became harder and harder to compete. Then, on February 15, 1947, Elsa became a grandmother. Her first granddaughter, Marissa Berenson, was born, destined to become a model and film actress. Overjoyed, Elsa purchased a new home in Tunisia, in the town of Hammamet. She began to write the very memoir you're reading now. But the business began to fade. Despite mass licensing agreements with American department stores, for clothing, hats, and lingerie for both women and men, by 1954, Elsa presented what would be her final, pared-down collection. It came just before her arch-rival, Coco Chanel, returned from Lausanne to Paris after a 14-year absence, determined to reclaim her legacy, revive her couture house, and lift the sales of her perfumes. On December 13, 1954, Schiaparelli officially closed her Paris fashion house. Yet she continued to sell her perfumes and accessories, hats and sunglasses, in the United States. Chanel would ultimately claim the upper hand in this long duel between two goddesses of fashion, but in 1971, she was the first to pass, dying alone in her suite at the Ritz. Schiaparelli outlived her by 2 years. She passed quietly in her sleep in Paris, on November 13, 1973. Her final wish? To be buried in a pajama set, in shocking pink, at the cemetery of a small Picardy village called Froker. Before her death, she gifted a significant portion of her dress collection to the Philadelphia Museum of Art and to the Musée de la Mode in Paris, on Rue de Rivoli. A decade later, in 1983, her name was reborn. A major retrospective of Elsa Schiaparelli's work opened in Paris, at Forum Les Halles. It was a triumph, and at last, the world remembered her with admiration. Preface.
I know Schiap only by rumor. by reflection in a mirror. To me, she is something like a fifth dimension. Unpredictable, yes, but her simplicity is disarming. Profoundly lazy, yet somehow capable of working with blazing speed and fury. She is a contradiction, laughter and tears in one breath. Watching her work is watching a storm shift, despair turning, suddenly, into joy. She is generous and stingy all at once. She may offer you half of everything she owns, or refuse to give up a handkerchief from her bag. Deeply human, she both loves and despises her own duality. She sees right through people she does not value. She endures sorrow and hardship, but, luckily, never quite learned to adapt. Her whole life, she was chasing something else, haunted by a question mark. She's drawn to mysticism, believes in it even now, though she still doesn't know what it truly is. Grown in years, she never quite grew up. She clings to friendship with childlike hope, too demanding, sometimes. And once disappointed, she makes an enemy for life. Flattery and small talk exhaust her. She never understood how anyone could see life as an end in itself. She can be utterly charming, and at other times, unbearable. She knows this, but she cannot seem to change. People say, Elsa is a good businesswoman, but she lacks tenderness. Or, she's no good at business. People take advantage of her, deceive her. And maybe that's true, but she has suffered far more than most, and endured more humiliations than she will ever confess. I have seen her, in the mirror. And then, there is her famous portrait by Picasso. Her friends, and yes, she has many, insist it captures her perfectly. In the painting, there is a cage. Beneath it, playing cards lie scattered on a cloth of green velvet. Inside the cage, a poor white dove, sorrowful, staring at a shiny pink apple. Outside the bars stands a black bird, furious, wings flapping, challenging the sky. Pablo Picasso, Portrait of Elsa Schiaparelli, 1933. For no treasure in the world would Elsa part with this portrait. Even if, as her mother once predicted, she were left with nothing but a crust of bread and a straw mattress in an empty room. The room would not be empty, it would contain her portrait, painted by Picasso. Let us hope her mother's prophecy never comes to pass. But even if it did, Schiap would know, in the face of success, despair, and a fragile good name, the highest flame, the purest impulse, burns from within her. And no one, not envy, nor tyranny, nor punishment, can extinguish that.
Chapter 1.
St. Peter's Basilica, a unique masterpiece of genius, encircles the round piazza with its colonnade, like a crab's claws or the tentacles of an octopus. It seemed like the open arms of a mother, ready to draw all the lost and wandering souls to her heart, offering them hope, offering salvation. One day, a small procession entered St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Leading the way was a scholarly man, his beard tinged with gray, and beside him a woman, no longer young but gentle-faced. Following them was a girl of about 10, with unmistakably Roman features and long, dark braids. And finally, there came a nursemaid, dressed like all Roman nannies, a full, multicolored skirt, a tight velvet bodice pulled snug at the waist, and a massive, elaborate bow, woven from vibrant tartan, that floated above her head like a halo. In her arms, she carried a baby. The Corsini Palace stood in Trastevere, the oldest, and perhaps the most Roman, of Rome's neighborhoods. On one side of the palace was an asylum, on the other, a prison. And yet the palace itself rose gracefully, surrounded by the sweet scent of magnolias, in a garden arranged in perfect squares and lined with rows of mandarin and lemon trees. Its facade unfolded in view of the Janiculum Hill, home to one of Rome's most famous parks. At the summit stood the statue of Garibaldi on a wild horse. Not far off, the Villa Farnesina. According to legend, Rome was shaken by a great explosion just after Schiap's birth. In truth, it happened sometime later. The gunpowder depot of San Paolo had blown up, and plaster flew from the palace walls. Schiap insisted she remembered it. The sound, she said, was terrifying. Several tiles in the palace cracked. Her nurse, in panic, insisted on being led through the entire city. Child clutched tight to her chest, just to see with her own eyes what had survived. They led her as far as the Capretari Cafe, near the university, where the city faded into countryside, and goats wandered the streets freely. That, apparently, was enough to calm the nurse. It was there, on a terrace edged with glossy pink begonias, that Schiap was rolled in her stroller and left for hours beneath a pepper tree. She remembered it vividly, though she was only a year old. The terrace overlooked the Lindsay Library. Strangely, it is the library, not toys or family, that lives in her earliest memories. The Lindsay Library, with its grand columns and enormous maps of the world, seemed vast beyond imagining. To me, as a very small child, it inspired a delicious sense of peace and detachment. Later, when I was a little older, I was allowed to leaf through books filled with illustrations, enchanted figures beneath skies painted by hand in delicate blues and blood-red hues. Eventually, my father's own library became my sanctuary, my joy. On the pages of rare, irreplaceable books, I discovered the worlds of ancient religions and stepped into the realm of art. After my father's death, my mother donated the entire collection to the National Library. It broke my heart. I had so longed to inherit it. One day, we discovered that my Wagner-loving nanny was a drunk and a disgrace. When she carried me in her arms, there was a strange clinking sound beneath her voluminous skirts, bottles knocking together. My teetotaler parents were puzzled, but the truth came out only when my sister, in all her innocence, told them the nanny was hiding me in the tavern downstairs while she drank herself senseless. She was fired immediately, leaving behind a screaming, starved baby, me, with no wet nurse. It turned out I'd been fed, for the most part, not breast milk, but alcohol. Back then, there were no marvelous American bottles, no vitamins, no baby formulas. My father, fetching goat's milk for me, would tuck the bottle under his arm to keep it warm. I suspect this early experience played no small part in the development of my rebellious, headstrong nature. Goats, in fact, held a curious importance in my family history. My mother, raised on the island of Malta like many well-bred children, was herself nursed on goat's milk. Every home on the island kept a goat, and right on schedule, the goat would climb the stairs, be brushed by a maid, and then milked, so the baby could be fed. My maternal grandmother, part Scottish, her father had served as the British consul in Malta, was raised in the Far East. At the age of 12, she married my grandfather, an Italian from Salerno. By the time she died, at just 20 years old, she had borne 5 children, one of them, my mother. Her husband had once been a political exile. Arrested by the Bourbons, he escaped, and his uncle took his place in prison. Years later, the uncle emerged, blind. My grandfather left Italy for Egypt, became a legal scholar, and eventually rose to the position of advisor to the Khedive, the ruler of Egypt. A prestigious post. When he died, he was carried to his burial by the hands of the people. At that time, my mother was only 10, orphaned. Her guardian, Count Serristori, a friend of the family, lived in Florence. My father came from the industrial region of Piedmont. One of his sisters managed all the convents in Italy. One of his brothers became a renowned astronomer. My father, however, was a solitary man, not antisocial, but simply uninterested in society. He divided his time between work and the study of the East, Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit manuscripts. Later in life, he became enamored with coins. He amassed a vast numismatic collection, and traded specimens with none other than the King of Italy, himself a famous collector. He never attended parties or social events. Once a week, in the evenings, he would visit an old friend. The next morning, I'd find a single sweet left for me on my nightstand. Proof that he, along with my mother who usually accompanied him, had thought of me, even during their rare night out. My mother was forbidden to attend court ceremonies. Etiquette would have required her to wear a décolleté gown, and my father would not allow it. Every morning at 6, before anyone else in the house was awake, he went walking. Again, at 2 in the afternoon, when the heat drove others indoors, he would walk. He preferred the heat to unwanted company. Wherever we traveled, he insisted on climbing to the highest point, the roof of a building, the main tower of a city, and always took me with him. I was terrified of heights, crushed by vertigo. I would curl into myself, trembling, eyes tightly shut. Despite his silence, he was kind. But I never did understand what sort of relationship he had with my mother, or how, over 10 years, the two of them managed to bring 2 children into the world. When I was 3, or perhaps 4, my father hired a Zulu governess. Not because he thought I needed one, but because he wished to study her language. She was formidable, towering, dark-skinned, bony, her gray-streaked hair cropped short, a look that would only become fashionable decades later. Each night, she'd step quietly into my dim bedroom, a trembling candle in hand. Sitting at the foot of my bed, she'd whisper, "I love you so much. I've buried everyone I ever loved, and I'd like to bury you too." We'd walk through the narrow alleyways of Trastevere, and street boys would follow us, yelling, throwing stones, calling out, "Get out of here, Queen of Tetu." In those days, the Italian public loathed Abyssinians. If she was black, she must be one of them. She believed the only balm for such cruelty was a pastry shop. Stuff me full of cream cakes, and the world would soften. It often did. Back then, by society's standards, I was not a pretty child. My eyes were too big. I looked underfed, a child of shadows. Her tenure ended, as it had to. She was discovered to be a drunk. Bottles clinked beneath her skirts as she carried me. My poor abstinent parents, puzzled by the sound, only discovered the truth when my sister confessed. She left me in the tavern downstairs while she drank. They fired her at once. For days I cried, starving for comfort, a child weaned not on milk, but on alcohol. There were no fine American baby bottles, no vitamins, no delicate powders for infant digestion. My father, ever inventive, would warm a bottle of goat's milk under his arm, tucked tightly beneath his coat. No doubt, that early goat's milk helped ferment my stubbornness. Goats, incidentally, played a rather important role in our family. My mother, raised on the island of Malta like any respectable child of class, had been nursed on goat's milk too. On that island, goats were summoned to the homes at a precise hour. Up the stairs they climbed, were washed by the maid, and dutifully milked for the waiting baby. My maternal grandmother, half Scottish, daughter of a British consul in Malta, was raised in the Far East. She married at 12. Her husband, my grandfather, was a political exile. When arrested by the Bourbons, he escaped, and his uncle took his place in prison. Years later, that uncle emerged, blind. My grandfather fled to Egypt, became a legal scholar, and in time, advisor to the Khedive. When he died, the people carried his coffin with their bare hands. My mother was 10, newly orphaned. Her guardian, Count Serristori, took her in and raised her in Florence. And me? I told stories, even then. At Christmas time, after the Zulu lady was gone, a new governess arrived, a German woman named Metzinger. She ordered a massive Christmas tree shipped from the Black Forest. It reached the ceiling. Its limbs glittered with angels and glass. And that's when I told my first lie. In the kitchen, where I slipped away for crusty cornbread, I told Rosa, the cook, in a whisper. "You know, Rosa, they treat me very well. You'd almost think I was their real daughter." Her eyes widened. "What are you saying?" "Well, I'm not really their child. I'm a poor orphan. They adopted me, but it's a secret. You mustn't tell anyone." We both cried. We took hands and swore our silence. But the weight was too much for Rosa. She began casting teary-eyed glances at my mother. My mother grew suspicious. "What's going on, Rosa?" "Oh, madam, you're so kind, so very kind." "Rosa, what are you hiding from me? This child, this poor foundling. And yet you treat her like your own." "Foundling?" The truth unraveled. My father, typically gentle, flew into rage. He lifted my dress and delivered a single, resounding slap to my backside. The first and only. I remember being astonished by the strength of his hand. He, who couldn't tolerate the smallest lie. For days after, I'd sneak off to the mirror, pull down my skirts, and check for the fading red mark. I could not sit for days. I was a difficult child. That never changed. People around me repeated it constantly. Elsa is not pretty. My sister, yes, but not me. Eventually I believed them, so I searched for a way to become beautiful. What if flowers grew from my face? A whole garden, morning glories, nasturtiums, daisies, in full bloom. I asked the gardener for seeds. Planted them in my ears, my nose, my mouth, hoping they would take root in my warm body. But in this cruel material world, consequences bloom faster than dreams. I began to suffocate. My mother, panicked, summoned a doctor, who declared her imaginative daughter needed less illusion, more discipline. But then a second doctor discovered a forgotten wad of cotton, left in my nose by the first. It had hardened like stone. It could have been fatal. The only tragedy I recognized? The flowers never grew, and I remained unbeautiful. My father didn't punish me this time. Such a cultured, discreet man. Few of his writings were ever published, but to this day, scholars consult his works on Eastern languages. And collectors, oh, they came from every corner of the world just to see his medals. Kind, approachable, devoted to his family, a true citizen, incorruptible, patriotic. He refused honors and decorations. Some mistook it for arrogance. It was only shyness, a quiet detachment from pomp. He was stern with us, honest with himself, and unwavering in his principles. In a dusty attic room, my mother kept her wedding gown and past fashions tucked away in a giant trunk. I would spend hours up there, dressing myself in her memories. I found strange little white pillows. Women in her youth tied them under their skirts to lift the bust and define the hips. I thought it beautiful, still do. There was the lingerie, impossibly delicate, dresses of every color, modest in taste, but each one with a waist like a whisper. I'd sit there, lost in reverie, trying to picture who my mother once was. Then school began, and I quickly discovered it was nothing like the gentle, child-centered havens some are lucky to know. Mine was a grim dungeon, ruled by discipline. Questions weren't welcome, curiosity was a crime. My teacher, hawk-like, took an instant dislike to me. We clashed. She told me I'd come to a bad end. But I had other plans. I had no interest in the life of an outcast. I'd prove her wrong. Just then, the Tiber overflowed. Yellow waters surged through the streets, especially along our Lungara, the river road. But I was too young to see disaster. To me, it was all delight. No more boring school walks. A boat picked me up each morning. I'd climb out the window. It was like living in a fairy tale. Even school felt less unbearable. When the water receded, the streets were darker, dirtier than before. Only later, when mother took me to visit the poor who'd lost everything, did I realize how selfish I had been. I never wished for another flood again. A wave of patriotism swept across Italy. There were parades, tree planting ceremonies, and marches, and I, of course, was caught up in it. That's when it happened. A demonstration turned violent. Patriots clashed with communists on Piazza Venezia. Shouts turned to bloodshed. Children were trampled. People were hurt. There were even deaths. And yet, to me, it was an adventure. For the first time, I was free. No one told me what to do. I was 6, and I felt important. I threw myself into revolution. Followed the mob to Quirinale Square, right to the king's palace. I was thrilled by the chaos, giddy with my own eccentricity. When night fell, tired and hungry, I hailed a carriage. "Take me to Palazzo Corsini," I ordered, with all the gravity I could summon. The driver blinked but cracked his whip. There was my father, waiting at the door. The police had been searching for hours. A little girl, lost in the riots, perhaps dead. I stepped down from the carriage as if nothing had happened. "Papa," I said, "please pay the driver," and walked inside. During some of our summers, we stayed not far from Rome, in Tivoli, the town of 1,000 fountains, nestled on a hillside crowned by the Villa d'Este. Small houses hid behind ancient olive trees, and it was there I made my first real friends. A gang of boys, of which I naturally became the ringleader. I never understood mechanics, but bicycles I managed just fine. The first ride was pure delight. The second nearly ended in catastrophe. I found myself in front of a moving train, its wheels clattering inches from my trembling frame. Perhaps even a bicycle was too complex a machine for me. I still struggle with telephones. As a child, I was enchanted by the story of Christ walking on water. I had enough faith, why not try? Strangely, I couldn't find the perfect pool or sea. But there it was, shimmering in the sun. I jumped. Alas, it wasn't water at all. It was quicklime, blazing beneath the light, and soon I was burning. A young artist named Pigeon saw me from his window, noticed the strange movements of a small girl flailing in white powder, and rushed to save me. I was rescued, once again, but also disillusioned, again. Even with scorched shoes and the sorry remains of a cotton frock, I still believed in miracles. Later, I heard of parachute jumps. They fascinated me. I wanted to try. This was rare for a child then. So I climbed to the second floor, opened a huge umbrella, and leapt. My guardian angel didn't sleep that day. I landed in a pile of manure. Humiliated beyond words, but unharmed. Time passed. I was put into a dress with a black velvet collar that made me feel like a monkey in a zoo. To complete the absurdity, I was made to wear an enormous brown hat with a massive yellow bow. But childhood ended early. I was being prepared for my first communion. I had a mystical streak, and the occasion touched me deeply. The fact of being alive never quite satisfied me. Success and wealth barely impressed. Money, yes, it rings sweetly in the purse. But a whisper always lingered. Am I truly real? The soul needs faith, the body, pleasure. But faith is abstract. Pleasure vanishes. They sent me to the most aristocratic convent in Rome, the Lucchese convent, to prepare for confirmation. The sisters, in flowing blue and white gowns like sacred vestals, kept the altar flames alive, prayed before the tabernacle, and swept down the halls like ethereal brides. The atmosphere exalted and crushed me. I trembled from head to toe, reciting the catechism over and over, memorizing sins I hadn't yet imagined. When it was time for confession, I was determined to humble myself. I would declare every mortal sin, every vice, just to ascend faster to heaven. So there I was, beating my chest, whispering fervently, "Yes, Father, I have committed sins of the flesh." The priest, unsure whether to scold or weep, stepped from the confessional and gently asked, "My child, do you even know what you're saying?" "I'm not sure, Father," I replied. "But it sounds like a very serious sin." Overwhelmed with shame, I fainted. The shock to my young soul was so great that my parents transferred me to a Protestant school, run by a spinster named Signorina Arnoletto. I believe they chose it simply because it had the best reputation in Rome. Our mornings began with a wild patriotic hymn, fueled by Italy's stubborn hatred of Austrians and Germans. I still remember the words. "Away from Italy, out with the foreigners. The fields of Italy belong to us alone." In the hush of Roman afternoons, we were fed endless lectures on the Bible. But my gaze, it wandered, floating beyond the classroom, beyond the stained windows, to the fountains of Piazza della Terme. There, Roman waters danced over languid marble nymphs, their bare stone bodies glistening in light, their stillness pulsing with myth. I was captivated by the biblical tales. I asked myself, over and over, what would happen to me if I dared what they had done? For that simple wonder, I was nearly accused of being possessed by the devil. It took me years to understand. The only true sin is the one that betrays the divine spark within, the soul. The food at our school was dreadful. My sister and I, bound by the same strict regimen, complained endlessly. We were accused of being spoiled. But one day, an idea struck, theatrical and perfect. We poured some of the awful soup into a bottle and brought it home. After charming the housemaid into playing along, we served it to our mother in place of her usual broth. She tasted it and recoiled in fury. "Take this horror away from me." The cook must have lost her mind. But no, it wasn't the cook, it was us. We confessed. And from that day forward, we were allowed to bring our food from home, nestled in little baskets like secrets. My greatest grievance, however, was being sent to bed early when our parents entertained guests. One evening, plotting mischief, I carefully gathered fleas in a glass. Yes, fleas, and hid beneath the dining table before anyone arrived. As the room filled with elegant ladies and stately men, I waited. At the perfect moment, during the roast, I released my crawling storm. A dignified chaos ensued, one hand under the table, then another, scratching, squirming, until the guests, unable to endure the torment, fled one by one. I was discovered, of course. Vanished to my room in disgrace, triumphant, but itchy with consequence. They always said my sister was the pretty one. I believed it. Her beauty was Grecian, inherited from our eccentric Scottish godmother who lived near Florence. She slept on the floor, to my horror, and named her villa the House of Athena. She wished to become a nun. The family wouldn't hear of it. She married, raised 2 sons, but I suspect she always mourned her lost vocation. Yet wherever she was, every morning at 6, she attended Mass. My father's family, well, beauty did not run on that side. One cousin, a famous Egyptologist, ghastly man, was perhaps the most unpleasant person I've ever known. But no matter, the museums of Cairo overflow with his discoveries, and he's among the few ever permitted to remove a sarcophagus, with its inhabitant, from Egypt. That's how the remarkable Egyptian Museum in Turin came to be. And still, for all his unpleasantness, he was one of the kindest souls. When not digging up tombs, he was in Sicily, or even China, rescuing children condemned to labor in sulfur mines. He found them gentler work, or enrolled them in school. I pitied him, though, he couldn't stomach sea voyages and spent entire crossings confined to his cabin. He doted on the few strands of hair clinging to his bald crown, smoothing them with absurd tenderness, as if preserving the last thread of his youth. As we drift deeper into the memoirs of Elsa Schiaparelli, Surrealist couturière of the 20th century, the lines between memory and myth begin to blur. What follows is a vivid portrait of a family both eccentric and extraordinary, drawn from her own recollections with wit, wonder, and a touch of cosmic irreverence. Narration begins, voice soft, deliberate, and lyrical. My mother's brother, a dazzling cavalry officer, and her sister, they both possessed a beauty that was almost unnerving. Her life, laced with adventure, drew disapproval from most. But to me, obsessed as I was with all things beautiful, Aunt Lily was enchanting. There's a story that still tickles my imagination. Once, while walking a narrow street in Naples, she passed a monk. So stunned was he by her appearance that he covered his face in his robe's wide sleeve and fled, exclaiming, "Begone, Satan." Naturally, her reputation suffered, but eventually she married a lawyer and moved to Egypt. From there she sent us parcels, exotic trinkets, luxurious fabrics, and in a rather austere household, they set fire to my imagination. No one suspected the kind of wild, swirling dreams those packages ignited in me. On my father's side, the standout was his brother, Giovanni Schiaparelli. A truly fascinating man, director of the Brera Observatory in Milan. Like my father, he preferred solitude. New faces made him bristle like a porcupine. Still, that didn't stop him from starting a large family. He was famously absent-minded. On his wedding day, he took his young bride to Vienna and, shortly after arriving, said, "Excuse me, I must meet a fellow astronomer." And off he went, thinking only of telescopes and stars. The poor woman waited for hours in tears. She hadn't seen him since breakfast. Dinner came and went. Night fell. Finally, he returned the next morning, asked for the room key, and found her sobbing on the floor. "Oh," he gasped. "I completely forgot I'd gotten married." He adored me, said I was born with the constellation Ursa Major on my cheek. He meant the beauty spots, of course. He'd lift me up so I could peer through his massive telescope and whisper secrets about Mars. He believed the planet was inhabited, that Martians harvested crops, just like we did. His discovery of Martian canals was hailed as one of the most important astronomical findings of the age. He was devout, simple, and full of a quiet strength. I spent many joyful days in his Empire-style home outside Milan, watching him stir polenta before a glowing hearth. We'd dine together around a vast table and walk afterward down an alley lined with cypress trees. An image etched in my memory like a print from an old book. He was full of cosmic curiosity, always seeking new patterns in the stars, new laws of the universe. Yet when friends tried to make him a senator, he'd raise his gentle eyes and ask, "But, why me?" One blazing summer afternoon, a delegation of officials arrived to make their case. They rang the bell. Nothing. The servants were out, and the astronomer, no doubt wandering Mars in his mind, had forgotten all. Eventually he opened the door, stark naked in the sweltering heat. Despite this, he was appointed senator by royal decree. Senators write laws for people, he once mused. I only know the laws of the stars. He showed up at the Senate exactly once, to take his oath, to prove his patriotism, and never returned. As his eyesight faded, and the telescope blurred, he turned instead to ancient Hebrew, the language of Babylonian astronomers. And when he passed away, the observatory honored him with a full minute of silence, a silence so vast, it echoed the cosmos. Today, they speak his name, as they do Volta, Galileo, or Spinoza. The work of this small, gentle man continues to stir minds far beyond the stars he once loved. When my father left his post at the university, we moved from the Palazzo Corsini to a home on Piazza Santa Maria Maggiore. The windows offered a magnificent view of the basilica, but there was no longer a mysterious attic with a romantic trunk. No garden. And I felt utterly lost. To console me, my father decided to take me with him to Tunisia. I was 13. I loved adventure, but I had never stepped foot on a ship before. We sailed through stormy seas, and were the only passengers who never left the deck. From the moment we arrived, private households began inviting us in, homes filled with strange European furniture and lush gardens. But while my father entertained, I was ushered into the harems, far from the dreams I'd conjured. The furnishings were dreadful, gigantic mirrored armoires, but I did learn to eat the most exquisite lamb, with my hands. That was when the first extraordinary episode of my life occurred. One of the most powerful Arab men in the country asked for my hand in marriage. I had no idea when he first noticed me, only that he began parading outside my window in a sweeping white gandora, mounted on a magnificent steed. Behind him, his entourage galloped on black horses. Forming a line in the center of the square, they launched into a performance the Arabs call Fantasia, a breathtaking equestrian dance, with spears raised to the sky, charging and turning in synchronized fury. A proper young lady, of course, remained unseen. I was only permitted to glance through the curtains. I didn't realize the entire show was meant for me. When my father told me, I suddenly felt like a woman, and ready to say yes to this mysterious suitor. But alas, father believed I was still too young. And so, I missed my chance at a life that, perhaps, would have been peaceful. Years later, in the throes of my most difficult battles, I often remembered that moment, and wondered. Returning to Italy, I saw the world with new eyes. I had witnessed true beauty. I felt like a woman. A child, perhaps, who hadn't yet faced all that real life entails, but a woman nonetheless. My mother insisted I study music. I was made to sit at the piano and strike the same note, over and over, an unbearable torment. Eventually, I began faking hysterics after every lesson. The act worked. The lessons ended. As for religion, one kiss nearly killed the woman in me. It happened during an innocent flirtation with a slightly older boy, and the sweetness of that first kiss stayed with me. I liked it. The sensation was pleasant. But the strict rules instilled since childhood, along with my religious upbringing, made me believe I'd committed a terrible sin. I was racked with guilt, terrified of the consequences. In those days, nothing was explained to girls. Parents thought it indecent. I fled to Santa Maria Maggiore to confess. Unfortunately, the priest had no tact. Judging by my terrified face, he assumed the worst, and began asking revolting questions. I was completely unaware, and his words violated my most intimate feelings. Horrified, I ran out sobbing, and never returned to the confessional. It was a tragedy for me. Confession is one of the Catholic Church's wisest institutions. To be able to unburden your soul in complete trust, knowing your secrets will never be betrayed, and that your mistakes, if sincerely regretted, will be forgiven and forgotten, that was a gift. Psychoanalysis. what we now call a science, was meant to replace confession. But both carry their dangers. Religious confession is safer. It is anonymous, impartial, received by someone for whom it is a vocation. Psychoanalysis, on the other hand, is inherently commercial, and far less sacred.